when you were a kid growing up, what was life like in your home right before company came for dinner? Now, I'm guessing there's maybe a few people whose parents were like type B personalities, and it was like, it's fine if it looks like a bomb went off. But the truth is, probably for most of you, you had at least one type A parent. I did too. And it was like, it is go time. And so suddenly you discover that your mom is actually like a Marine drill sergeant. It's like their alter ego. And you're like racing around and you're scrubbing surfaces and grabbing dirty laundry and tidying things up and doing your best so that when the Johnsons come over, they think your home is immaculate. You remember that surge of adrenaline? And inevitably what would happen is you'd realize, oh my gosh, we got 3 minutes left. We're not clean yet. And so you'd have that closet or maybe a room or maybe your garage and you just start chucking. Like you're just like firing stuff in there. You're like, we just got to get this out of sight, out of mind so that when these people come, we look pristine. And the doorbell would ring. You take a breath and put on your smile and open the door to your picture perfect home. Can you relate? Every so often, things would go sideways though. A guest would say, oh, yeah, can I use your washroom? And you'd say, oh yeah, it's just second door on the left. And they'd be like, all right. And you'd hear a door open, kind of like a little gasp. And they'd be like, sorry, first door on the left or second? And you're like, oh my gosh. They just opened the door to that room. Like we've been exposed. Like now they know who we really are. You're looking at your siblings across the table like, what are we going to do? Mom's going to kill us again. Some of you, it's a room in your house. Others of you, it's the trunk of your car. I've talked to guys in the trades, and there's like, yeah, I got leftover lunch from 2017 in the truck. You're like, oh, right, okay, that's the spot. But you see, we often have a space in our home, sometimes a space in our lives, that we put everything that we don't want anyone else to see. And the truth is that from a young age, we learn to present the best parts of ourselves while actually hiding the worst. Maybe you've been there. That's what you learn to do. And so that's what you do. You're learning and you're acting on that. You're presenting the best parts of yourself. You're hiding the worst until you can't. You see, sometimes someone whose life seems immaculate reveals that there's been so much more going on beneath the surface. Maybe you or someone you know what it is, they know what it's like to own the latest and greatest fashion, car, home, sports equipment, you name it. Things look amazing. But they're drowning in debt. Maybe you or someone you know what it is to crush it at work, to hit deadlines, to exceed expectations. But you can't make it through the day without alcohol in your system. Maybe you've got a great online following and are posting the best, most glorious pictures of you and your family. But you know that you're deeply disconnected from your spouse and from your kids. We know what it is to promote the best and hide the worst. Is that your reality? Like many of you, I was raised to be a standout, to get good grades, to compete in sports and captain sports teams, to learn a musical instrument. Man, I was even in the Boy Scouts. Like there's a lot of boxes I was checking. And it's not a bad thing to have good expectations, high expectations. But the danger becomes when you only know what it is to exist as someone who's showing your best and hiding the worst. Over time, my experience of that was that my soul was suffocating. And I wonder if some of you can relate. If you grew up in a home and there was that thing that your family was going to be known for, maybe it was great academics, maybe it was a really impressive career, maybe it was making lots of money, maybe it was being beautiful and fit, maybe it was popularity. And no one explicitly said it, but you knew that at the heart of this family, that was what you put forward, and there was so much more that you hid. So you learned to create the picture-perfect life. And maybe today you're still trying to live that picture-perfect life, but you're empty inside. But what if you could lay aside the masks that you wear and experience new life. Live with joy and hope and purpose from the inside out. What if you could be real? That's what today's message is all about. If you're joining us, we're in part 3 of a series called Counterfeit Faith, and we're looking at a question that says, if Christianity is so good, why are some Christians so bad? And actually looking at a chapter from the book of Matthew, which is in the New Testament, where Jesus, he confronts the uber religious, the super spiritual people known as the Pharisees, the religious teachers or the teachers of the law, who had manicured the perfect image, but were dead inside. And he does that to offer something infinitely better. Let's jump in verses 23 and 24. Jesus says this, "What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! For you're careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. You blind guides, you strain your water so you won't accidentally swallow a gnat, but you swallow a camel." Like, what's the deal with tithes and camels? And what's Jesus saying? He's saying that human beings have an unbelievable ability to ignore major problems while becoming experts in tiny ones. If I could be kind of vulnerable with you on that front for a minute, I can't speak for you, but there's a time in my life where I could be really critical and self-righteous towards people who are suffering and struggling, especially homeless people. I was quick to preemptively judge a person. Why don't they have a job? Why'd they choose to start drinking in the first place? Don't they know it's dumb to get addicted? I would be so arrogant and condescending and use that as a way to excuse acting on their real need. One day in my early 20s, I was doing lunch with a friend, kind of on an outdoor patio, and a guy came up and he looked pretty rough and he smelled even rougher. And he said, "You guys don't have any change, do you?" My friend said, "Nah, no, sorry," which was a lie, by the way. And he started to walk off. And I felt like some of you have felt in your own experiences. I felt the Holy Spirit just lovingly, tenderly smack me in the back of the head and say, "That guy's hungry. Feed him." So I did. So I grabbed him lunch, and we had lunch together. And that evolved into a friendship. Going to church together on Sundays, activities midweek, him being a part of some family gatherings as well. And me hearing the story of someone who'd been through unbelievable hardship and pain. And me learning to see someone as so much more than a societal problem, but a real person of significance, loved and valued by God. And at the end of that summer, he got a job in a different city and he moved away. But I had to confront the reality in my own heart that I'm someone who can become an expert in tiny problems while ignoring people's biggest needs. How about you? You see, counterfeit religion is meticulous about rules and rituals while neglecting real people. It's characterized by misplaced priorities. He's probably going to spend it on alcohol or drugs or something else. I had to reframe my priorities. Where might you need to reframe yours? Where are your priorities potentially misplaced? Are you in a situation where you know your neighbor's going through a really hard time and they just need someone to invite them over to sit on your deck and just have a conversation for 2, 3, 4 hours just to listen and to care? But you're like, man, time is precious and I got to do my lawn. I got to work on the flower garden. I'd rather just perfect my own space than play the wild card of inviting somebody who's hurting over for a conversation that could who knows how long. Maybe you know that local food banks in Simcoe County are constantly working so hard to keep up with the demand for food because of food insecurity in this county. And you could consistently be buying and donating food. But if you did that, You might not have the funds for the latest and greatest smartphone, and you really want that smartphone. So you don't. Maybe you've got a colleague or a peer who's going through a really messy divorce. And for someone to make them a meal and show up and just say, hey, I'm thinking of you, I care about you, let me just serve you in some simple, practical way. You know that would go a long distance. But yeah, that could be so messy. So you just keep it servicey, keep it casual, keep it professional. Don't get to the heart of what they're going through. Where are you like me, focusing on tiny inconveniences, minute rules, rather than meeting someone in their need? Because true faith actually sees the suffering of others and acts to restore by meeting real needs. And that's because as Jesus has just called out among these religious leaders, he's saying you're missing justice, mercy, and faithfulness, and that's because true faith is devoted to justice and mercy and faithfulness. Right priorities. So Jesus calls out misplaced priorities, and it should cause us to ask, well, what's the consequence of living with misplaced priorities? What does it lead to in your life and mine? Look at what Jesus says next. He says, what sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites. He's just, letting them know exactly how he feels about them. For you are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first wash the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside will become clean too. Many of you will recognize the name Lance Armstrong. Actually, for years, the Live Strong movement, which was built around Lance Armstrong, inspired millions of people. What had happened is that after surviving cancer and winning the Tour de France, it's a cycling race, a record 7 consecutive times, Armstrong became this global symbol of courage and perseverance and hope. And at the time, these yellow Live Strong bracelets were everywhere. And Lance's story really seemed untouchable until the truth came out. That behind the inspiring image was systematic doping and deception and manipulation. And what made the scandal so shocking wasn't just the cheating, but the gap between the public image and the hidden reality. On the outside was inspiration and success and victory. But underneath was dishonesty and corruption. And Armstrong's story helps us realize that what makes hypocrisy so dangerous is that appearances can become so convincing that even people believing the lie, who are living the lie, begin to believe it themselves. And Armstrong built his whole life, his identity, his reputation, and his success on a lie. When the truth came out, it all fell apart. What do misplaced priorities lead to? Misplaced priorities lead to false identities. A perspective on life and reality that says all that matters is who people think you are, not who you really are. And this is the counterfeit faith that Jesus is exposing. Because counterfeit faith reduces integrity, who you really are, to manageable externals, who people think you are. Counterfeit faith focuses on appearance, while Jesus is dialed in to transforming your heart. And the crazy thing is that you can improve your habits and your image, your reputation, and all the while remain spiritually unchanged. That behavior modification alone can't actually lead to a transformed heart. And Jesus is being so straight shooting with these religious leaders because he knows that they're using their morality, their behavior modification itself, as a self-salvation. That these Pharisees and teachers of the law, they thought, man, if I can use morality as self-salvation, I'll just become a person to say, if I can just convince people that I'm a certain status of holy or successful or moral or good, then I'll be fine. If I can just convince everyone that the lie I've created is actually true. You talk about an empty life. remember hearing a pastor speak a number of years ago and talking about this temptation in our lives and saying something that I've never forgotten, not as a good thing, but as something that he himself was trying to work on and change in his life. And he said, the truth is, I'm not building my identity on who I am. I'm not building my identity on who you think I am. I'm actually building my identity on who I think you think I am. You been there? Consider Armstrong again. Who do I think these people think I am? Well, I'm a pro athlete. I'm a champion. I have this incredible story of overcoming. And so I'm going to keep living into that image for years, even though it's a lie, even though there's a scandal, even though there's manipulation and deceit going on. I need to be who I think you think I am, because that's my identity. And maybe you've been there. Oh, who do I think my boss thinks I am? That's who I need to be. Who do I think my spouse or my kids think I am? That's who I need to be. Who do I think other people in my church around me, who do I think they think I am? That's who I need to try and be. And the truth of who you are gets totally lost. And Jesus comes to free you from that. So if you can fool everyone else with a fake identity, what happens if your fake identity is fooling you too? If misplaced priorities lead to a false identity, what happens when you're believing the lie yourself? Jesus continues in verse 27. He says, "What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! For you're like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but filled on the inside with dead people's bones and all sorts of impurity. Outwardly, you look like righteous people, but inwardly, your hearts are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness." Jesus is giving a cultural illustration because he's sharing this message a few days ahead of the Passover. And the Passover was a time when Jews from across first century Palestine came together in the city of Jerusalem to celebrate God's deliverance of his people. And so as part of that celebration and honoring their heritage, Jews in Jerusalem would go into the surrounding countryside to the tombs of their ancestors, and they would whitewash the outside as this expression of honor and respect for these people. And so if you were on pilgrimage coming to the city of Jerusalem, as you approached and as the sun rose over the countryside, you'd see the landscape was dotted with thousands of these glistening white tombs. It was actually kind of beautiful, bright, clean, impressive. But inside was death. And Jesus says counterfeit faith is religious cosmetics. It's attempting to make death look beautiful. It's just a show. It's missing the need for a transformed heart. You see, misplaced identity leads to a false hope. People living in a way that says, if I can just keep the status quo, if I can just make my boss happy, if I can just project a certain image online, then I'll be okay. Then I'll be fine. If everybody thinks I'm a good person, then of course I'll be a good person. But it neglects the brokenness of the heart. You see, counterfeit faith appears beautiful, but it leads to death. And so often, if you were to sit down in a church service, you'd probably hear someone up here talking about the things you shouldn't do that are wrong, talking about a wild lifestyle or an irresponsible lifestyle or hedonistic living that is indulgent and reckless. And Jesus is actually flying to the opposite side of that spectrum. And he's saying, you want to know something? A person can know the Bible from back to front. They can serve publicly. They can attend church. They can appear moral, but still remain spiritually unchanged, actually have a dead heart. They can lack a life that's transformed by the grace of God. The grace is the undeserved goodness of God. This is why you've all seen countless examples of Christians tied to scandals who had the perfect image for so long but were dead inside. It's so easy to live a lie if you're embracing a counterfeit faith. And here's why. Because counterfeit faith is so toxic not because it ignores virtue, but because it avoids grace. There's no place to admit need or weakness or failure or insecurity or ask for help. Everything has to appear perfect. And the Pharisees believed performance could save them, that appearance could justify them. And Jesus exposes this as a lie because he loves people too much to let them live with a false hope. That he's saying only God's grace, his undeserved goodness, can transform dead hearts. Only Jesus can give you real, lasting hope. So how do you know? How do you know if you've built your life on image management rather than character formation, on appearances rather than soul transformation? How do you know? Well, what happens to you when your character or your achievements are questioned? What happens when someone points out a blind spot in your life? Are you humble, receptive, open to that? Or do you become defensive and angry, or you power up and try to be superior, or maybe you just wilt under the criticism and you feel crushed? How do you respond? I remember meeting a woman who had a few kids, and they were decent kids. Sometimes they were idiots, but they weren't, they're kids. We're all idiots when we're kids sometimes. And what was fascinating was that if anybody said anything remotely negative about her kids, even if it was true, why was Bobby just cutting up in class yesterday? It was a huge distraction. She lost it. She became so angry and defensive. She would become hypercritical to other people. What was going on? Her whole sense of identity was built on projecting to the world that she had a flawless family. And so critique of her kids struck at the core of her identity, and she couldn't handle it. She couldn't cope. You see, your response when someone critiques your character or your achievements or points out a blind spot, your response reveals what your identity is built on. And if it's built on your appearance, that's a life that leads to death. That will never sustain you. That will not give you a lasting hope. But the thing is, literally every world religion is screaming at you saying, clean up the outside. That's what counterfeit faith says. Clean up the outside. Polish that tomb. Be nice and shiny and impressive. Accept Christianity. Accept the good news of Jesus. Jesus says, let me transform you from the inside out. Receive my grace in your life to become a new person. You see, the awesome truth of the good news of Jesus is that Jesus didn't come to polish your image. He came to give dead hearts new life, to do what only he can do. Man, I want you to experience that new life. Paul, who is an author of a ton of new books in the New Testament, he writes this in a book called 2 Corinthians. He says, for God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin so that we could be made right with God through Christ. He's talking about the greatest exchange in the history of humankind. He's saying Christ, who is good and pure and holy, and you and I who are broken and sinful, he takes all of our brokenness on himself at the cross. He's willing to be condemned. He's willing to be defined by the shameful things you and I have done. And in exchange, he gives you and I his goodness, his righteousness, his mercy, his forgiveness, a new life, a transformed heart. It's this incredible exchange, and it's entirely because of the goodness of God in Jesus. And it's the absolute opposite of trying to keep up a perfect image, to keep up with appearances, to try and impress everybody with your picture-perfect life. It's actually saying, I can't keep it together. I don't have all the answers. I am a broken person, and God has taken that brokenness on himself in Jesus and given me new life and hope and healing and freedom, and I can live in and thrive in that reality as a result. I can be truly human. The hope of Christianity is not that good people can impress God. The hope of Christianity is that sinners can be transformed by the free gift of God's grace. And so today, you can be free from misplaced priorities that lead to fake identities and that ultimately create a false hope. And I want you to experience God's new life in you so that you can have not just a hope, but an indestructible hope. That because Jesus is alive, you are forgiven. That because Jesus is alive, you can heal. That because Jesus is alive, you are loved with a love that no one and nothing can take away. That because Jesus is alive, you can live in a hope that no circumstance can take away from you. It's indestructible. And you can be free from a counterfeit faith based on appearances or religious performance, and show up humbly and honestly and authentically and be changed. To boil it down, it could be this, to say, don't perform Christianity. It's not what Jesus came to establish, but to be transformed by Christ. To not live a life of checking boxes, but to encounter the living God in a way that changes you from the inside out. I want you to be able to live in this hope, to have this hope. So here's some action steps I'd love for you to be taking. In John, it says that Jesus came from the Father full of grace and truth, that Jesus' life is marked by truth and grace, and that a new life is marked by the same truth and grace. What that means is that if you're going to step into new life, you need to choose truth, because choosing truth leads to transparency, honesty, authenticity. This is who I really am. Let me open the door and show you that room in my house, in my life. But what's so hard is that we actually live in a culture that is obsessed with image management. Like, people are constantly posting the best moments while hiding their deepest struggles. And we know it's so sad that so many people stay silent for years because they assume no one will walk with them through addiction or trauma or failure or mental illness or some other form of brokenness. But the truth is that healing begins where honesty begins. And Jesus offers you a hope that's actually grounded in the truth, in the honest reality of who he is, that perfect Son of God, and what he's done, that he's gone to the cross to take your sin and brokenness on himself, to give you forgiveness and new life, to tell you the truth of how broken you are and the truth of how infinitely loved you are, and that you can be made whole. So that you don't have to live the lie that you are your image and live in the fear that comes from avoiding showing anyone those things in your life that you're most ashamed of or that are your biggest regrets. Transparency kills that. There's a great quote from a guy named David Kinnaman, and he says, "Transparency disarms an image is everything generation." So who really knows you? Like the real you, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, that when you wake up first thing in the morning with bedhead, you. Who can you be brutally honest with about every part of your life? And what could it look like to have a conversation with that person or those people to say, hey, this is the truth about me, what I'm going through, what I'm struggling with, where I'm asking God to show up in a powerful way in my life. To lead off with transparency. And with that, what could it look like to take a step farther to say, I want to grow as a person, so can you tell me the truth? Can you have a transparent conversation with me about what it's like to live with me, to be on the other side of me, to be my friend or my sibling or my spouse or my colleague? It's a little more intimidating. But be honest with me, am I the same person at church that I am at home? Or at home that I am at work? Or at work that I am when connecting with my buddies? Or am I just managing different images? Am I building my identity on who I think they think I am? Would you have the courage to have that conversation with someone this week, even today, about who you really are, what you really need, and what it's like to live on the other side of you? But here's the deal. We don't just choose transparency for the sake of kind of unloading what's going on in us. Like transparency is for the sake of transformation. And so just as Jesus is full of truth and invites us to know the truth about who we are, tell the truth about who we are, he also invites us to experience grace. Grace that leads to transformation. And that's actually the invitation, not just to be transparent about what's going sideways in your life, but to then lean into the grace that transforms you. Because transparency is not permission to stay stuck. Like some people just want to regurgitate the same messed up reality of their lives again and again and again and again with no intention of ever changing. Healthy transparency produces humility, repentance, healing, and transformation. God, I need you and I need my community. I need to grow and heal and change. And what's so beautiful about that when you do that is you're putting your confidence in God's grace. You're saying what Jesus has done for me, the exchange of my brokenness for his wholeness, that is greater than my sin. It's greater than my shame. It's greater than my failures. My life is defined by who he says I am. That's my identity. And I can rest in that rather than keeping up appearances. But because you know that you've received undeserved grace, and because of experiencing that grace, you can live with grace towards others. Because every single one of us is just like a beggar showing other beggars where the bread is. All of us have experienced the undeserved goodness of God. So I wonder, what could it look like for you to show undeserved grace to someone this week? Not your best friend or your favorite colleague, but that person in your family, in your neighborhood, maybe in your workplace, that you cannot stand. And if tomorrow you show up doing all kinds of nice stuff for me, I'll know what's up. But to say, God has shown me his undeserved grace, how can I show that to someone else in my life as an expression of his love and his heart for them that is changing me? You know, these things aren't easy to do. To tell the truth about yourself, to invite others to tell you the truth about what it's like to do life with you, to lean into God's grace, not your own effort and accomplishment and image management, and to show grace to others, that's not easy. But if I could be transparent with you, I'd love to share one example of what it's looked like in my own life. Because part of the heartbeat of this whole series is that the last decade plus of my life has been me unlearning what it is to be an image managing, appearance driven, what does everyone else think of me person and follower of Jesus Christ. And a huge part of that has involved going back to people I was in high school with, people I was in university with, others in the years since then, to tell the truth. And one example of that was with a university teammate of mine, a guy I played soccer with. He lives in a different country, so I wrote him a letter. And I just simply said this: when I think back to our time in university together, I was an idiot. There were a lot of times where you had a different perspective from me, where you invited me to have open-hearted, sincere conversation. But I thought I had the truth. I thought I had the corner on what God wanted. I thought my understanding needed to be everybody's understanding. And so I shut you down, or I ridiculed you, and I failed to respect you, and to honor you. And I missed out on a real friendship with you because of my pride, because I was so focused on getting it right and everybody else seeing like I had all the answers. I wasn't willing to admit my weakness and my flaws. And so I'm just asking for your forgiveness. And I want to thank you for your patience to me in those moments. That's not a fun letter to write. But man, choosing to show up that way in people's lives will deeply change you. And the gift of being met by that teammate's grace was an expression of God's grace to me. So this week, who's that person you can tell the truth to and invite to tell the truth to you? Perhaps you're stepping into group this week. And what might it look like to give others in that group permission to hear the truth about where you're at, what you're struggling with, what you're going through, what you need God to do in your life? and maybe even to tell you the truth about what it's like to live on the other side of you. What might it look like to step into each day receiving God's grace and saying, God, who are you going to put in my life today that you want me to show that same grace to? If you could hear my heart before we close on this whole truth, this whole teaching from Matthew 23 is deeply personal for me because I know what it is to live the lie of an image management faith. And I know what it is to embark on the struggle of laying that down to be real. And you need to know it is hard. Like, it is incredibly costly to tell the truth. Because you lose control of managing the image and how you hoped everyone will see you. And because there's people who know they can control your life by you keeping up an image. And when they can't, they'll hurt you. And if there's ever a space that can struggle with image management, it can be the church. And if there's ever a space that can thrive in honesty and humility and vulnerability, it's the church. And if you choose to tell the truth and lean into God's grace, you need to know it's going to cost you, but there's also a reward, a very real reward. And the reward is Jesus himself. The reward is the reality in your own life of experiencing Jesus in a life-changing way. The reward is stepping into other people's stories and being used by God to make a real, lasting difference in their stories where it matters most. The reward is actually being able to look yourself in the mirror in the eye at the end of the day and say, I believe I'm living in a way that other people can actually emulate on some level. But the reward ultimately is Jesus, is him for real in your life. In a second, we're going to sing a song that anchors our lives in that. Sing, Jesus, nothing else will do. No image management, no appearance-driven whatever. I'm not just trying to create the picture-perfect life. I want you. I need you. I receive that exchange of my brokenness for your wholeness. And I'm inviting you to give me new life. Don't perform Christianity. Be transformed by Jesus Christ. Would you stand with me as we pray? God, we're so grateful for the gift of your word that calls us out, that comforts us, and that shows us the way home. Holy Spirit, today you know exactly what you want to do in every single heart and life. You know where our misplaced priorities have led to false identities that lead to a fake and untrustworthy hope. We want to make Jesus our hope. We want to make him our identity. We want our priorities to be marked by living out who he is, his grace and truth in this world. And so would you help us to tell the truth about ourselves? Would you help us to receive the truth about ourselves? Would you empower us to be a people who live in your grace, the undeserved reality that we are forgiven and free because Jesus Christ has given his life for us and is alive? And would you cause us to be people who live that grace to a broken world? In your name.